President Bola Tinubu on Wednesday presented the 49.7 trillion naira budget proposal for 2025 fiscal year before the joint session of the National Assembly in Abuja, with the defense and security sector getting the highest allocation of about 4.91 trillion naira. The defense and security is closely followed by infrastructure, with the sum of 4.06 trillion naira proposed, while the sum of 2.48 trillion naira is allocated for the health sector and 3.52 trillion naira was budgeted for the education sector. President Tinubu, in the budget presentation held at the House of Representatives chamber, let's just say the House of Assembly, noted that the budget christened a budget of restoration, securing peace, rebuilding prosperity, strikes at the very core of its renewed hope agenda and demonstrated its government's commitment to stabilizing the economy, improving lives, and repositioning the country for greater performance. So this morning, we're joined by Kalu Aja, certified financial trainer. And of course, let me welcome Kalu first. You're welcome. Thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thanks for having me. Thank you so much.
And we also have joining us from Abuja, Iniobong Usen, Head Research and Policy Advisory at BudgIT. Thank you so much, Iniobong, for also joining us. Okay, so let me start with Kalu anyway. All right, let me start with Kalu. Let's start with your honest assessment of the 2025 proposed budget of 49.7 trillion naira.
Well, it's very, very optimistic. There are a lot of good things that they want to do with very, very little revenues. It's a very small budget. If you convert the budget naira to dollars, it's actually a reduction from 2024. So a lot of spending, a lot of money that's going to go towards debt repayment, not a lot going to the really productive sectors, education, health, even infrastructure. So it's very, very, the assumptions come up very, very, optimistic. And it's more like we are dependent on crude oil to ensure that we get the budget right. So that's how I'll put it. They are skating on very thin ice. Let's put it that way.
Let me get into this. Looking at what Kalu said, he said, in dollar terms, it's quite small, and it's a drop in terms of how the size of the budget is. How do you see it?
Yeah, thank you. I do align with him, but before I even address the question, I'd like to even speak to some of the happenings before the budget was presented. It was presented too late, too close to the end of the year. We've been able to manage the January to December calendar in a way. Albeit, the fact that we've been rolling over, budgets from a previous year to the current fiscal year. But it doesn't all go well that we're presenting the budget 5 or 8 days to Christmas, 2 weeks to the end of the year. This would mean that the budget would be enacted, way into January 2025, when the budget implementation should have occurred. We also see that there was some feudant slip, right, in the budget speech. And even on your screen now, I see that you represent what the president had stated, 47.9 trillion naira, whilst what is in the draft put up by the budget office is 49.7 trillion naira. Ditto the revenue projections as well. The president had mentioned about 34 trillion naira, but the appropriation draft bill, states 36.4 trillion naira. So these are small errors that I felt that could have been avoided. But coming into the budget proper, if I look at the key assumptions, right, on which the budget has been anchored, and you look at the benchmark for oil price, it seems a bit conservative if you consider the fact that Brent crude is currently going for $73 per barrel, and then we're projecting to sell at $75 per barrel. So that seems a bit, somewhat conservative. If you look at production numbers as well, at 2.06 million barrels per day, it seems a bit closer to what we did in November at 1.8 million barrels per day. So if the federal government is able to continue with some of the interventions in that area to curb oil theft, to attract additional investments in that sector to ramp up production, and reduce the cost of production, we do expect that if we do not have get up to 2.06 million barrels per day, it would be a bit close if they are able to sustain, some of the gains that have happened. But if you look at the inflation projection, one wonders what is really driving that optimism that we would be able to more than half inflation, from the current levels. Inflation is currently, sitting at almost 34%. And the budget sort of projects that for the 2025 fiscal year, that we would have dropped inflation to about 15%. This definitely does not seem feasible, especially if you look at the drivers, the key drivers of inflation, looking at food inflation, looking at energy, the cost of energy as well. These are not, indicators that we see, considering all the interventions that are happening across, both sectors. We see that would abate, in the next coming months. So one wonders what is really, really driving government's optimism about inflation, declining to 15%. And if we come to the budget framework itself, a revenue projection of 36.4 trillion naira seems overly optimistic, especially if you put it side by side with what we're able to do in 2023 and the first 8 months of 2024. If you look at oil revenue, that is projected, at 19.6 trillion, I think, for the 2025 fiscal year, and you compare that to what was realized in 2023 at 2.3 trillion, and for the first 8 months of 2024 at 4 trillion, it still seems the 19 trillion naira still seems like a very tall order. And so if we're not able to realize that 19 trillion, this does not augur well for the effective and efficient implementation of the budget. It's going to lead to low budget credibility, huge deficits that would need to be financed by additional borrowing. And so we wait to see how things will play out in the coming fiscal year.
What you said in your response had to do with the inflation figures that the government is targeting that should decline to about 15%. And the president also mentioned that Forex would appreciate, so to speak, from 1,700 naira to a dollar to 1,500 naira to a dollar. So, Kalu, how realistic do you think these assumptions are?
Look at it this way. Nigeria is a derivative of Brent crude. The exchange rate is really going to be how much oil we're able to export and the price of crude oil. If we end with 2025 and oil prices still stay at 75, 80, and we do about 2.2, 2.3, the naira would appreciate because we're going to have that net surplus and more inflows even through remittances. But this is why I'm saying thin ice. If you look globally, Russia is tying up India with supplies. OPEC is cutting production because demand is going to fall. The US is going to start to pump out more crude oil. So oil prices look like are going to keep on going down, which means that as we're increasing output, we might not have that price to then meet that budget that we're projecting. If we can't sell at the volume and at the price, the naira will not gain that value. That's just the point. So it's a bit too optimistic. Like you said, we're at 75. The market is saying 73. We should have been at 60 to be very, very confident and give ourselves a big margin of error there. So it's a very, very tall order. It's also with the inflation numbers, we're at 34, they are projecting 15, and it's driven by food. So are we going to grow food and stop the bandits in 12 months? That's the question. It's not going to happen really. So again, if we know it's not going to happen, why are we putting in the budget? Why are we planning with inflation of 15 and exchange of about 1,400? That's the problem I have. So why are they putting it in there? Is it to make the budget look good, or do they really plan to achieve what they're writing down there? That's just my take.
It's quite interesting, Kalu, if all this will play out, and the government is looking at expenditure to be around 47.9 trillion naira, including 15.81 trillion naira in debt servicing. How fiscally healthy now would it be for the Nigerian government with what it is hoping to spend and the possibility of global market forces not helping it achieve its revenue?
Let me make it easy for you. If we hit the revenue target, we hit 100% revenue target, it's going to go to just two areas: debt service and salaries. That's it. So any money we want to use to do capital expenditures, to build roads and all that, we're going to borrow it. So debt service is about 45%. And this is if we hit the target 100%, which we're not going to hit it. So again, you look at the budget, and so we want to spend a lot, and we're basing that spending on selling just one commodity, crude oil. We look at the trade report, it's up, but it's on crude oil. Cocoa, cashew, the rest don't give us $1 billion. So we are a mono economy, banking on the fact that the world's going to need a lot of oil in 2025. If we don't get that, we're going to come back to borrow. Remember, we just borrowed $2 billion in December to fund the 2024 budget. Same is going to happen if oil prices don't go up or if we cannot pump out that oil. So we're spending too much to service the debt, too much, and we're going to keep on borrowing. There is no emphasis to cut spending. We should be talking about an austerity budget and not a budget to spend 45% on just debt service. A bit too much.
Okay, so Iniobong, if we now resort to borrowing as a country pivoted by the government, we're already looking at a debt burden of over 130 trillion naira, if I am correct. Now, where does that put Nigeria in terms of its fiscal ability to drive both its domestic and, especially domestic expenditure, so to speak?
I mean, debt utilization, is one area where we haven't done too well, right? If you look at the performance of Nigeria's debt with regards to the critical sectors of the economy where debt has been utilized, and I would like to pick the oil sector, for instance. Over the last 4 or 5 years, the NNPC, has embarked on resource-backed loans, hedging our crude oil, getting loans at relatively high interest rates, and then we do not see value for money. You look at the Port Harcourt refinery, about $1.5 billion was acquired by the NNPC for a turnaround maintenance. And what we're hearing these days is that it's been converted into a blending plant, and we are not getting value for money. And this, replicates across board, right? If you look at the lending to, rehabilitate roads, to build new roads, and you see the quality of the roads built with such funds, you would see that even 3 months, 6 months, 1 year after such projects have been implemented, the projects fail, right? So we start rehabilitating those roads even before we start repaying those loans. And it doesn't just happen at the federal government level, it also happens at the subnational level, where the quality of the projects implemented with whether loans or revenues coming from the different sources, right, is not sort of sustainable enough to be able to keep those projects running, to stimulate the economy, drive growth, and for us to be able to generate enough revenue in the medium to long term to be able to pay back those loans. And so debt utilization is one area where I think that we can do better. We need to be able to deploy these very expensive loans or debt, as the case may be, into areas that we can maximize the gains, whether it's in health, whether it's in education, or whether it's in very sustainable infrastructure that is able to drive economic growth and give us the gains we need to be able to repay those loans when they are due.
Okay, so Kalu, we are looking at 13.08 trillion naira in the budget gap that we're seeing, and you know that the issue around tax reform bills by this administration is still a bone of contention at the Legislative House as of now. Do you think that could offer a bit of buffer in any way?
Yeah, that's one bright spark, that the local non-oil collections looks good, i.e. if they're able to pass those tax bills. Even without those tax bills being passed, we're seeing a lot of, streamlining of tax collections, VAT and all that. So that's one bright spark, that the Naira collection revenues has gone up. So that would help. But remember, we are exporting crude oil and we're importing PMS. We're exporting cocoa, we're importing cocoa powder. The point I'm making is that we're a dollar economy, i.e., the wealth comes from selling crude oil, 89%, and then we convert it to Naira, then we pay salaries. So in the end, the VAT, the corporate income taxes are all tied one way or the other to the revenues Nigeria gets from crude oil. Without that crude oil coming into the country, companies do not have funds to pay salaries for people to consume. So it's all interconnected. We haven't decoupled the economy away from just one source of FX, and that's the problem. So we might call it corporate income tax, we might call it VAT, but it's just oil in disguise, really. The economy is still mono, 89% tied to crude oil. But that area is one bright spot that I think can help out the non-oil local questions in Naira, especially if we're able to pass those 4 tax reform bills that have been discussed right now.
Okay, back to Iniobong. Now let's look at some key allocations here. In the budget, defense and security 4.91 trillion naira, infrastructure 4.6 trillion naira, health 2.48 trillion, education 3.52 trillion naira. Now, some people have said that what has been allocated to the defense and security is way too much compared to what was allocated to health and education. We didn't even hear so much in terms of what is being allocated to agriculture, though the president mentioned it in passing. But then what do you think of those allocations?
I mean, if I start from the last sector you spoke to, the budget office has released the disaggregated, and the detailed appropriation bill. And so I've been able to look at, the key allocations to some of those sectors. For agric, it's about 636.08 billion, putting it at 1.28% of the total budget. So my problem with the federal government budget as it regards specific sectors, and I'll start with the agric, is the misallocation of resources. It's not even the adequacy of the budget itself, because by the time this budget is passed into law and the National Assembly has reviewed it, if we rely on what has happened in the past, you would see that 60 to 70% of the allocation to that sector will be going to activities, projects, programs that are not in tandem or not in alignment with either the mandate of that ministry or the policy trust of the government, for that sector. You would see the Federal Ministry of Agric or, the agencies under it that is supposed to be saddled with the responsibility of ensuring food security, improving, food production across, the length and breadth of this country, getting involved with building roads, sinking boreholes, building primary healthcare centers, and all of these in locations that you cannot really track. Meaning that the lean resources that we have to be able to drive, productivity in that sector is redirected to areas that either shouldn't be a priority of the federal government, or to areas where the federal government, as a whole, does not have the capacity to implement, the implementation of those projects. So whilst, we have an issue with the adequacy of, the allocations to key sectors, there's also a very core issue with the utilization of even the funds are available on programs, activities, projects that should be the core focus of those ministries. And this is because we have not been able to directly tie our annual budgets to the national development plans. If you take a critical look at the national development plan, the government has been able to clearly articulate its development roadmap. It's been able to identify areas where we need to deploy resources to be able to drive growth, to be able to drive efficiency, and ensure that a lot of these sectors that should be driving the economy are firing on all cylinders. But when it comes to the deployment of these resources through the budget, there's a divergence. It doesn't speak to the plans that we seek to achieve. And so what happens is that year in, year out, we spend a lot of money, through the instrument of states, ministries, departments, and agencies of government. And those targets that we had, sought to achieve in the National Development Plan, we do not achieve them. In a number of cases, there's even a retrogression, in that regard. If you look at out-of-school children, if you look at universal health coverage, if you look at maternal mortality, neonatal mortality, if you look at, our cultivation of land. All of these indicators across board, if you track over the last 10 years, it doesn't seem like any progress has been made if you compare what has been spent to the results on the ground.
So Iniobong, let me just quickly confirm. Did you say 68 billion to the agri sector?
No, 636.08 billion.
636.08 billion. Okay, so let me just quickly put that to Kalu now to get his reaction on that. For a government that's spoken much about food insecurity, and you talked about the potential of the non-oil sector a while ago. And we've always known that the agri sector has been a huge money spinner for Nigeria in time past. Does it seem as though the government is aligning its words with its actions?
Not really. Again, go back to the trade report. 89% of Nigeria's trade is crude oil, i.e. the revenues we're getting. Agriculture is nothing. We're just mountain agriculture, cocoa, it's nothing in terms of revenues that we get in Nigeria. But the security budget I look at, if they can use that budget to clean out the bandits and get the farmers back to farm in the north and middle belt, then that's going to be, it helps inflation, it helps supply of food, it helps job creation. Agriculture is 20% of our workforce, right? 20% of our GDP as well. That helps the economy. So if that's what they want to use the security budget to do, then that's more or less an economic, catalyst to the economy. That makes sense. But if it's just to go buy new helicopters, new jets, then it's not going to really achieve anything. The problem in Nigeria is the high cost of food. It's driving inflation, it's reducing consumption, it's making people poorer. If we can stop the inflation caused by high food prices, we begin to get a hold on inflation, we begin to hold the deficit, more jobs, more wealth created. So that figure you see, like here, Harry said, is not going to really materially change anything. Farmers just need to go back to farm so that the infrastructure, the roads can get those goods from the north to the markets in the south so that food prices come down and then interest rates start to come down. That just has to be the goal, to tie the security budget to agriculture, to infrastructure in this short to medium term, so prices fall.
Okay, now back to Iniobong. We're even talking about the 2025, budgets that would probably be fully ratified. But then we need to track back a bit and look at the 2024 budget, how it performed. Now, we realized about 14.55 trillion naira as revenue, according to the president, looking at the 2024 budget from a projected 18 trillion. One would say that's quite modest. But then there was a 21.6 trillion naira expenditure on the budget. Now, the budget is still running, and we saw multiple borrowings almost every month. The president kept coming up with different reasons to have to borrow. Now, if that continues, what do you think the future of Nigeria is fiscally? Then, two, what I'd like to point out is that how would you even rate the performance of the running 2024 budget?
So, thank you. You also have to acknowledge the fact that we're running 4 budgets concurrently at the moment. The 2023 budget was extended first to June. The implementation of that budget was extended to June 2024 and further extended to December 2024. Ditto the 2023 supplementary budget, and then you have the 2024 budget, and then there was a 2024 supplementary budget. This is very untidy, considering the fact that you are going to be implementing this budget with your revenue projected in 2024. And if you look at the principles of budgeting, that sort of guides or provides a guidance on how government, should go about its public financial management activities within a 12-month calendar year. It suggests that everything that you need to do should happen within a 12 calendar month. If you are not able to implement a specific segment of your budget or specific budget lines, the right thing to do is to roll it over to the next year's budget. The idea of implementing different budgets concurrently, it distorts the entire budget process. It creates a lot of confusion in the system. It brings issues around what to prioritize. So we need to try to use this 2025 fiscal year to clean up this practice of implementing multiple budgets concurrently. It doesn't allow us achieve desired, aim in a coordinated manner. It distorts the budget. You know, um, it doesn't allow us, do things in a proper manner for us to be able to attain some of the objectives that we have set out to do with the budget. So going into the 2025 fiscal year, and I would like to appeal to the National Assembly. We do not have, that latitude to accommodate the kind of waste, that we often see in the budget. As when it comes to reviewing the budget and a lot of those in sessions, I would like to plead with them for this year. Let the budget be sanitized. All of those projects that shouldn't be the business of the federal government in the first place, drilling of boreholes in remote communities that nobody has the capacity to monitor, street lights in communities that are not named, that nobody has the capacity to monitor, in tens and hundreds of billions, are things that I think we can do away with for now. Like the other guests in the studio had mentioned, there's a food crisis. All hands must be on deck to ensure that farmers are able to go back to the farm. We're able to cultivate land. We're able to provide the right technology for farmers to be able to improve their yield per hectare. There is that support in terms of credit, to be able to help farmers produce. And then we solve the issue of security. We improve the road infrastructure so that there's distribution of food to drive down prices. Every other thing can wait for now.
Okay.
The building of community town halls and all of that can wait till when we're able to feed ourselves, and be able to provide food at very affordable prices for Nigerians.
Okay, so let me wrap up with Kalu. Iniobong just talked about disruptions with 4 budgets running concurrently. But then that seems to be, departure from what the Senate president said that he's actually impressed by the 2024 budget specifically because, of course, he cited some sort of projection in terms of how it performed, 50% capital expenditure, 48% for current expenditure. And now the legislature is saying it will be moved or extended into June 2025. I'd like to quickly take a reaction on that.
I mean, how can he be impressed? They simply borrowed 2 billion in December to fund a budget in December. So just tells you what you need to about 2024 budget. They are not making their revenue targets, but they keep on spending. There's a huge deficit. And the reason why they have these 4 budgets is because of earmarks. So they put earmarks in the budget so they can't roll them over because folks are going to be afraid they're going to lose their earmarks. So you have 2023 supplementary, 2024 supplementary, now 2025, all in 2025 budget. So a lot of money going around. Who's going to manage and capture and sort of control what's happening? So there's no coordination. We have a coordinating minister of the economy, but I'm not sure there's a lot of coordination on how we are spending. Why are we importing PMS? That can be about it. You can't have a strong naira, have Dangote refinery, and keep importing PMS while exporting crude oil. And number 1 export is crude oil, and number 1 import is PMS, and we have a functional refinery right here in Lagos. So we have to ask those questions and connect those dots. The economy has got to be productive. It can't just be by if we spend money, then the budget has performed. The impact of the budget to the daily lives of Nigerians have to be taken into account. We've got to see people say they've gotten better roads, they can get clean water from their taps. Then we know the budget is working, not just to spend the money to import cars and to do those fancy projects.
So and I guess that will be the most important for the ordinary man or the ordinary Nigerian on the streets, how it will trickle down to them or to him or her and translate into economic prosperity and, of course, financial well-being for them. Very important. Kalu Aja, certified financial trainer, Iniobong Usen, head of research and policy advisory at BudgIT. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for sharing your thoughts with us.